In order for Canada to build our own competitive EV sector, we need to learn from innovative partners, access their supply chains, and increase local demand. That was Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, speaking from Beijing on Thursday, January 16, 2026, standing beside President Xi Jinping after announcing a historic tariff reset. 84% tariffs on canola dropping to 15% by March 1st, $4 billion annual market reopening for Canadian farmers. 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles entering Canada at 6.1% tariff rate, $240 billion trade corridor unlocking between Ottawa and Beijing, 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs, eliminated, $2.6 billion in retaliatory duties on Canadian agriculture removed, 8 years of diplomatic freeze following Huawei executive arrest, thawed overnight, all while Trump escalated pressure demanding Canadian compliance with American trade restrictions. While Trump threatened 25% tariffs to force Canadian alignment against China, Ottawa negotiated directly with Beijing. While Trump assumed economic coercion would isolate Canada from alternative partners, Carney secured the largest trade reset since NAFTA. While Trump positioned America as indispensable market, Canada proved Beijing offers equal, if not superior, opportunities. The calculation is staggering. Trump's tariff threats didn't force Canadian submission. They accelerated Canada's pivot eastward. Thursday, January 16, 2026, Great Hall of the People, Beijing. Mark Carney completed his first official state visit to China as Prime Minister. First Canadian leader to visit Beijing in 8 years, nearly a decade without high-level engagement following diplomatic catastrophe over Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou's 2018 arrest. Carney emerged from meetings with Xi Jinping holding signed preliminary agreement, mutual tariff reductions across agriculture, seafood, electric vehicles, commitments for expanded investment in Canadian manufacturing, framework for normalized trade relations. The canola breakthrough matters most immediately. China imposed 84% combined tariffs on Canadian canola seed in 2025, retaliation for Canada's 100% EV duties mirroring American restrictions. That tariff devastated Canadian prairie farmers. Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba producers lost access to their largest export market. Under new agreement, China reduces canola tariffs to approximately 15% by March 1st, returns to pre-dispute levels, unlocks $4 billion annual market, restores commercial relationship built over decades. Additional agricultural products gain relief simultaneously. Canadian canola meal, lobsters, crabs, peas, all subject to anti-discrimination tariffs throughout 2025, exempted from March 1st through end-of-year minimum. That removes duties on $2.6 billion worth of Canadian exports. Total agriculture and seafood package, nearly $7 billion in annual trade restored. In exchange, Canada adjusts electric vehicle policy, eliminates 100% tariff imposed in 2024, establishes quota system permitting 49,000 Chinese EVs annually at most favored nation rate of 6.1%. That volume corresponds to 2023 imports before trade friction escalated. Quota designed to balance multiple objectives, provides Canadian consumers access to affordable EVs, creates incentive for Chinese manufacturers to establish Canadian production partnerships, protects domestic automakers from unlimited imports while encouraging technology transfer. Carney explained the logic. Canada needs to learn from innovative partners, access their supply chains to build competitive EV sector. Direct acknowledgement that Chinese manufacturers lead global EV technology. Pragmatic acceptance that partnership with Beijing accelerates Canadian industrial development. Government expects agreement will drive considerable Chinese investment in Canada's auto sector within 3 years. Joint ventures, assembly plants, battery manufacturing, supply chain integration, all contingent on quota access providing market entry for Chinese brands. Provincial reaction split predictably. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe celebrated canola breakthrough, called it critical for prairie economy. Manitoba Farmers Association praised tariff reduction. British Columbia seafood industry welcomed lobster and crab duty removal. Ontario Premier Doug Ford condemned EV provisions, warned Chinese imports threaten Canadian auto manufacturing jobs, demanded federal government fix this mess before ratifying deal. Political division reflects fundamental question. Does partnership with China represent opportunity or threat? For 8 years, answer was unambiguously negative. Meng Wanzhou detention froze bilateral relations. China retaliated by arresting 2 Canadians, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, on espionage charges, held them for over 1,000 days, released only after Meng's extradition proceedings concluded and she returned to China. That hostage diplomacy poisoned Canadian public opinion toward Beijing. Successive opinion polls showed majority of Canadians viewed China negatively. Previous Prime Minister Justin Trudeau maintained hardline position throughout remainder of his tenure. Trade suffered accordingly. China banned Canadian canola seed imports in 2019, citing pest concerns, blocked meat shipments, imposed arbitrary inspection delays, erected non-tariff barriers across multiple sectors. Canadian exports to China declined from $26 billion in 2018 to $20 billion by 2023. 10% drop in Chinese imports of Canadian products in 2025 alone following EV tariff escalation. Relationship appeared irreparably damaged. Western allies encouraged Ottawa to maintain distance from Beijing. United States pressured Canada to align with American China containment strategy. Five Eyes intelligence partners warned against Chinese technology infiltration. Then Trump threatened Canadian annexation, imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum, threatened 25% duties on all Canadian exports, suggested military action to seize Greenland and potentially Canadian Arctic, questioned Canada's right to exist as sovereign nation. That changed every calculation. If alliance with United States provides no protection from American aggression, what value does alignment offer? If Washington treats Ottawa as subordinate territory rather than equal partner, why accept American restrictions on Canadian trade policy? Carney's government reached obvious conclusion: diversify, reduce dependency on American markets, develop alternative partnerships, assert independent foreign policy, unconstrained by Washington's preferences. China represents largest such alternative, world's second largest economy, massive consumer market, hungry for agricultural products, energy resources, manufactured goods, willing to invest in Canadian infrastructure, eager for stable supply relationships. Geography had always complicated Canada-China trade. Pacific Ocean separates Vancouver from Shanghai. Transportation costs higher than Canada-US border commerce. Time zones complicate business coordination. Cultural differences create friction, but those obstacles are manageable. Modern shipping makes trans-Pacific trade routine. Communication technology enables real-time collaboration. Chinese diaspora in Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal provides cultural bridges. Real barrier was political. American pressure to restrict China ties. Domestic backlash after hostage crisis. Fear of economic retaliation from Beijing. Trump's threats eliminated first barrier, hostage release and time removed second. Carney's diplomatic skills addressed third. The numbers tell transformation story. $240 billion trade corridor projection comes from government modeling, assumes full normalization of agricultural, seafood, energy, manufactured goods trade over a 5-year period. $7 billion annual agriculture and seafood exports restore immediately under tariff agreement. That's baseline, represents return to pre-dispute volumes. But China's demand for Canadian products extends far beyond. Canola seed and oil for food production, wheat for flour milling, barley and corn for livestock feed, peas and lentils for plant-based protein, beef and pork for growing middle-class meat consumption. Canadian prairie provinces can supply all these products. Saskatchewan and Alberta possess vast agricultural capacity. Existing infrastructure supports expanded production. Farmers eager for market access after years of trade barriers. China's population of 1.4 billion creates insatiable demand. Middle class of 400 million consumers seeking high-quality food products. Canadian reputation for safe, clean agriculture opens premium markets. Seafood follows similar pattern. Atlantic lobster prized in Chinese restaurants. Pacific crab commands premium prices. Geoduck clams from British Columbia considered delicacy. Wild-caught salmon superior to farmed alternatives. Canadian fishing industry can expand exports significantly. Maritime provinces on Atlantic coast, British Columbia on Pacific. Both regions position Canada as dual ocean seafood supplier. Energy represents next growth sector. China needs liquefied natural gas to replace coal power generation. Canada building Pacific LNG export terminals. British Columbia natural gas fields hold massive reserves. Chinese companies already invested in Canadian LNG projects. ProChina owns 15% stake in LNG Canada facility in Kitimat. That $40 billion project began operations in 2025, designed to export 14 million tons annually, predominantly to Asian markets. Additional LNG projects in development pipeline: Cedar LNG, KSI Lissam's LNG, Woodfibre LNG, all in British Columbia. Combined capacity approaching 50 million tons annually by 2030. China represents primary market for all facilities. If trade normalization proceeds, Chinese capital accelerates those projects. Joint ventures, equipment purchases, long-term supply contracts, infrastructure integration, manufacturing completes the picture. Electric vehicle partnership unlocks technology transfer. Chinese automakers establish Canadian assembly plants to serve North American market from inside tariff barriers. Battery manufacturing follows. Supply chain localization creates thousands of jobs. Beyond EVs, solar panels, wind turbines, grid storage systems, all sectors where Chinese companies lead globally. Canada wants that technology. China wants Canadian resources and market access. Trade serves both interests. Both. Add all sectors together: agriculture, seafood, energy, manufacturing. Model forward 5 years, assuming continued normalization, $240 billion cumulative trade corridor emerges. That's not wild speculation. It's conservative projection based on existing demand, proven Canadian capacity, and normalized tariff environment. What does United States lose? Leverage over Canadian trade policy. For decades, Washington assumed proximity and alliance meant automatic alignment. Canada would never diversify away from American markets because alternatives didn't exist. That assumption no longer holds. China offers comparable opportunities. Asia-Pacific markets collectively dwarf U.S. economy. European Union provides additional alternatives. Canada no longer depends exclusively on American consumers. Trump's tariff threats, intended to force compliance, backfired catastrophically. Instead of submission, provoked diversification. Instead of dependency, encouraged independence. Instead of alignment, accelerated pivot away from U.S.-centric trade. Agricultural exports illustrate perfectly. Canadian canola previously flowed to both China and United States. When China blocked access, American markets absorbed some surplus. U.S. processing facilities benefited. American consumers paid less for canola oil. Now China reopens at lower tariffs while Trump threatens 25% duties on Canadian agriculture. Where do prairie farmers send their harvest? Answer is obvious. Beijing offers $4 billion market with 15% tariffs. Washington threatens quarter of crop value in duties. Farmers aren't stupid. They'll ship to China. American processing facilities lose Canadian supply. U.S. consumers pay higher prices for canola products. Trump's tariffs hurt Americans while strengthening Canada-China trade. Seafood follows identical pattern. Atlantic lobster sells in both Boston and Shanghai. If American tariffs raise costs, Canadian fishermen redirect entire catch to China. Massachusetts loses supply. Chinese consumers gain access. Ottawa captures full revenue. Energy demonstrates even more dramatic shift. Canadian LNG intended for both Asian and American markets. If Washington imposes tariffs or restricts imports, all Canadian LNG flows to China. U.S. loses supply diversity. China locks in Canadian reserves. American leverage evaporates. Manufacturing shows the ultimate reversal. Canadian auto plants previously served U.S. market. Integrated supply chains crossed border constantly. American parts fed Canadian assembly. Canadian vehicles filled American dealerships. Chinese EV partnership breaks that integration. New plants serve Canadian and Chinese markets. Supply chains route through Asia-Pacific. American manufacturers lose access to Canadian production capacity. Ford, GM, Stellantis lobbied Ottawa to maintain Chinese EV tariffs, argued Canadian market should remain reserved for American-affiliated production. Premier Doug Ford echoed those demands. But Carney's government rejected that logic. Why protect American corporate interests when those same companies operate globally? Why limit Canadian consumer access to affordable EVs to benefit Detroit shareholders? Why constrain Canadian industrial development to preserve American market share? Questions answer themselves. Canada's national interest requires technology access, consumer choice, industrial development. Chinese partnership delivers all three. American objections reflect corporate lobbying, not Canadian priorities. Trump has no leverage to reverse this. Cannot tariff Canadian exports without raising costs for American consumers. Cannot sanction China trade without violating WTO rules and alienating allies, cannot force Ottawa to reject Beijing's offers without providing superior alternatives, and Trump offers no alternatives, only threats, only tariffs, only demands for submission, nothing resembling partnership. China offers opposite approach: investment, technology transfer, market access, long-term contracts, predictable trade relations, respect for Canadian sovereignty. From Canadian perspective, choice is simple: partner offering benefits or partner issuing threats, relationship enabling growth or relationship demanding subordination. Beijing wins that comparison overwhelmingly. Infrastructure creates permanence. Chinese investment in Canadian LNG facilities locks in decades of trade relationships. Multi-billion-dollar terminals operate for 40, 50 years, cannot be relocated or repurposed quickly. Joint venture EV plants establish similar permanence. Once Chinese automakers build Canadian factories, those facilities produce vehicles for generation. Workforce develops specialized skills. Supply chains establish connections. Knowledge embeds in Canadian industrial base. Agricultural trade develops institutional permanence. Chinese importers establish relationships with Canadian exporters. Quality standards align, logistics networks optimize, payment systems integrate, trust builds through repeated successful transactions. That trust persists through political changes. Canadian governments rotate, Chinese leadership transitions, but commercial relationships endure. Farmers know Chinese buyers, processors understand Chinese market requirements, shippers master trans-Pacific logistics. 20 years from now, Canadian canola automatically flows to Chinese crushing plants. Atlantic lobster naturally supplies Shanghai restaurants. Pacific LNG fills Chinese gas pipelines, none requiring government intervention, all sustained by commercial logic and established infrastructure. That's economic integration at structural level. Cannot be undone by presidential tweets, cannot be disrupted by temporary tariffs, cannot be reversed without massive economic disruption. Both sides resist. Trump cannot stop this. Threatening tariffs doesn't work when China offers larger markets. Demanding Canadian alignment fails when Beijing provides better terms. Claiming indispensability rings hollow when alternatives function smoothly. Trump has zero leverage. Every threat strengthens Canadian resolve to diversify. Every tariff justifies China partnership. Every annexation comment validates independent foreign policy. From Canadian perspective, this represents liberation. No longer hostage to American market access. No longer vulnerable to Washington's political dysfunction. No longer constrained by United States' increasingly erratic China policy. From Chinese perspective, this represents opportunity, secure access to resources and agricultural products, technology demonstration market for EV exports, beachhead into North American manufacturing, stable partner as counterweight to U.S. tensions. From American perspective, this represents catastrophic failure. Largest trading partner diversifying away, continental ally integrating with strategic competitor, neighbor rejecting U.S. leadership for Chinese partnership. Canada redirects $240 billion trade to China, U.S. export dominance crumbles, and North American economic integration permanently transformed. What do you think? Is Canada's tariff reset with China a temporary response to Trump's threats, or the beginning of a permanent eastward pivot that reshapes North American trade for generations? Subscribe for in-depth analysis on Canada-China relations, trade diversification strategies, agricultural and energy exports, and how Trump's pressure accelerates shifts Washington cannot control.